Well, welcome to day 2 of Virtual Medicine 22. Again, I'm Brennan Spiegel, the chairman of our VMed program here, along with Dr. Omer Liron and the rest of our VMed team. We're so happy that you're with us this morning from around the world for day 2 of VMed. Now, you've chosen to be in the XR Theater. There are 2 sessions simultaneous this morning, both the main stage and the XR Theater. Good news, even though you have to pick one or the other, you'll be able to circle back later because all of the material will be available on demand. Do continue to use the live chats actively. I think that's a great way to engage with one another and with the moderators. Several of us will be in the live chats throughout the day today, helping to answer questions, point out resources, and engage in discussions around this really dynamic and interesting material that we're hearing about from our colleagues from around the world. We really thank you again for joining us and supporting VMed 22. Also, please be sure, if you haven't already, to head on over to the exhibit hall during the breaks. We have 20 exhibitors with a wide variety of really interesting hardware and software solutions that may be of interest to you. Go check them out. You can also, in addition to just looking at the material, schedule some appointments to talk with the representatives from the different companies. All right, well, without further ado, I'm so happy to introduce our next speaker. That's Dr. Susan Persky, a friend and a colleague who is at the NIH, where she directs the Immersive Simulation Program, or the ISP, at the NIH. And she's worked with us and helped us with our own NIH-sponsored research. So we very much appreciate all the time and energy she spent helping with our own laboratory here at Cedars-Sinai. And I was so pleased when she agreed to participate in VMed 22. She'll be talking to us about the topic of preparing for precision medicine with a VR clinic. And as we start hearing more about the metaverse and what happens when medicine meets the metaverse, we're starting to understand, what does it even mean to have a VR clinic? So love to hear Susan's perspective, through an NIH lens, to help us all think about what the future of medicine looks like and what does a precision medicine VR clinic look like. So Susan, thank you so much for being at VMed 22. The stage is yours.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here this morning to share with you the way that we've applied virtual reality to help produce the roadmap for precision medicine. So I do this work at the Immersive Simulation Program. This is a behavioral science research lab that I founded in 2006 at the NIH. So the work I'll talk about today is really only a very small slice of what we do, but it's a very important slice as well. Now, the ultimate goal of precision medicine is to be able to use people's genetic information to make personalized recommendations for things like their treatment and ability to help to prevent heritable conditions and diseases like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. Now, using genomic information to personalize these approaches is not really there yet, right? The science is not quite ready. However, in genomics, translation does tend to happen fairly quickly, and sometimes too quickly for us to figure out whether genomic tools might have ripple effects. In particular, what I'm interested in here is the potential to exacerbate racial and other inequities in the healthcare system. So how should we be conducting research to address this? Now, obviously, the gold standard way to study clinical processes is to do experiments, right? RCTs. In this case, we would randomly assign some people to receive genomic information about future disease risk in a primary care visit, while others are in a control group. Now, there are a lot of downsides here, particularly since we're studying a process that isn't actually ready for clinical implementation at the current moment. So instead, we use virtual reality to simulate the situations that we are anticipating might arise in the near future. So we do this both in the clinical and the public health sphere, but I'm going to really focus on the clinic for today. So what we can do is evaluate the outcomes we're seeing from these visits within these simulations. So we can, in a way, sort of anticipate and study the medical care of the future. Then we can use the information that we're gleaning from this to create evidence-based approaches and recommendations that we can use and implement as the technology is unfolding, as opposed to sort of rushing to catch up later. Now, beyond this, there are, of course, several methodological benefits of virtual reality that are worth mentioning. This may be very familiar to many in this audience, but I think it's worth talking about the fact that we also get the ability to create these experimental situations that aren't otherwise really possible. So as you'll see a lot here in this case, we can hold a virtual person's race, weight, gender, etc., or we can vary it while holding absolutely everything else completely constant. So we can hold constant things like nonverbal behavior, their voice, the things they say, etc. So this is a really nice way to disentangle the influence of variables that we can't really isolate in real-world interactions. And then we can also build behavioral measures right into our virtual reality worlds, have them be continuous and non-intrusive. So for example, we can measure the participants' nonverbal behavior through automatic assessments of their body movement. So I'm going to jump into a simple example of this work. We did this well over a decade ago, as you can probably see from the avatar models here. But the question that we asked here was whether racial concordance or racial match between patient and doctor would influence African-American adults' perception of their cancer risk in response to the genomics information that this virtual doctor is providing for them. So this work obviously capitalized on this ability of VR to change the doctor's apparent race while keeping absolutely everything else, his voice, his nonverbals, etc., all the same. So in this study, a sample of African-American adults received cancer risk information from either a racially concordant, or in this case, Black doctor, or a racially discordant, or visually white doctor here. And the results we found in the study were really quite striking. So we looked at participants' perceptions of their own risk of lung cancer after the virtual visit. And this graph shows the difference between the risk information that participants received from the virtual doctor, so the sort of objective risk, versus their perception of their risk following the visit. So here in this graph, higher numbers are more inaccurate. So higher is worse. And what we saw was that those who saw a racially discordant, in this case, white provider, which is the darker of the gray bars here, were more inaccurate about their risk perception following the visit. And this was especially true for smokers, for whom this information is arguably more important. So we see here that the visual cues of provider race alone, all else held constant, can be quite impactful on the way our participants are processing health information. So this is sort of the basic effect on which we built for some of the work I'll talk about now. So another anticipated clinical scenario here is the introduction of genomics concepts about obesity into primary care. This is obviously a really big issue of many primary care visits. Now, some of our formative research earlier on had suggested that talking about genomics in these situations can really be a boon for patient-provider relationships. So it can make patients feel less blamed and less stigmatized for their condition. But we asked whether this is really a universal reaction. So for whom might genomic information be helpful? And one factor we looked into in this study was patient race. So here we had female participants with overweight interacting with a white male virtual provider. Now, looking at the patient's reports of the clinical discussion, here we're going to look just at the variable trust. So trust in this doctor. Now, for our Black patients on the left, genomic information in the light blue bar has more negative consequences than information about the behavioral factors in weight. And for our white participants on the right, we do see the initial pattern that we had anticipated and seen in previous work around patient trust. So the doctor talking about genomic factors in obesity was associated with higher trust for our white participants. The self-report measures, of course, are only part of the picture. As I mentioned, VR provides for automatic behavioral assessment of interpersonal interactions as well. So here we can look at implicit nonverbal behavior. And in this case, we looked at interpersonal distance. So this is sort of the lean in versus the lean away from the virtual doctor, which is a metric of engagement. And we looked at this over time during the visit. So I'm showing you some growth curve models here. And overall, what we saw are that two groups tended to move away from the virtual doctor as he started talking about causal factors in weight. And these were our Black participants who received genomic information, so the red curve here, and then our white participants who received behavioral information, or our blue curve here. And as you may remember, these are the types of information that each of these groups sort of preferred less. So overall, we found that these kinds of results were reflecting larger social patterns, right, related to concerns about genomic information being used as a tool sort of for discrimination and stigma. But experiments like these can really help us to understand how these processes are likely to actually play out in the clinic. So now I'm going to go into detail on a final, more recent example that investigates these interactions from the healthcare provider side. And this will give us a little bit of a fuller picture of the outcomes that we can use to try and triangulate these effects of precision medicine approaches and how they may interact with patient race. So in this study, we examined the influence of genomics risk reports for several common health conditions. We're anticipating this type of intervention in personalized medicine in the future, but this is not something that is occurring in the clinic yet, nor is it something that's really ready to happen in the clinic yet. And what we did was we looked at how these reports influence medical students' treatment of a patient with obesity and whether that influence of genomic information was the same depending upon whether the patient appeared to be white versus Black. So here again, we're manipulating the race of the virtual human patient and also whether medical students were provided with the genomic risk reports. Now, our primary outcome assessment was related to the recommendations that were made for the virtual patient's medical concerns. The patient here in this case reported unusual tiredness, and we cataloged what was included in her care plan by all of these medical students across conditions. And so we're showing a number of things that the medical students tended to include in care plans, but I'm going to direct your attention to one key element, which are the recommendations that relate directly to the genomic risk reports that were provided. So here, let's just look at this red box, and these are recommendations for diabetes screening and diabetes-related assessments. And what we found here was that the medical students were much more likely to recommend diabetes assessments in response to this patient's fatigue when they receive the risk reports, which makes sense. But we see also this is mainly happening when the patient is Black. And indeed, we found several differences in the way that medical students use this genomic risk information depending upon the patient's race. So then we also looked at self-reported explicit attitudes about the patient. And we looked at bias related to patient weight, and also related to some negatively viewed sort of non-adherent patient behaviors in another scale. And with a few exceptions, across these bias measures, we really did tend to see a general pattern. So I'm showing you here one measure of weight bias on the left and one related more to poor adherence. So In the control condition, on the left side of the graphs, the medical students, as we can see across both of these measures, tended to exhibit more bias against white patients with obesity, and that's the navy bar, than the Black patients with obesity, which is the teal bar. When the genomic information is presented, it improves ratings of the white patient, which I've marked here with the connecting bars, but it does not improve ratings of the Black patient. Now, some of these results might sound counterintuitive at first, but this finding is actually quite consistent with the intersectionality literature, where people tend to be more critical of obesity in white women than Black women. And this is a fairly common finding that's starting to come out of these studies. But we could ask how much of this is driven by social desirability in the lab, right? So the desire to be socially acceptable, and when you see a Black virtual patient across from you, not to rate them poorly. So here we can look to our implicit measures. The first one that I'm showing you here is related to the way the medical students spoke to the virtual patient. So here we assess the extent to which participants match the emotional tone of the virtual patient. This has been associated with empathy in the past. And what we saw was actually a very similar pattern to the last set of measures. So medical students in the control condition were more likely to match the emotional tone of the virtual patient if she was Black, but this no longer happened when genetic information was present. And then we can look again at medical student behavior during the clinical encounter with a virtual patient. This time, let's focus on gaze behavior, which is a proxy for eye contact. And here, the medical students were looking at the Black virtual patient's face more than the white patient's face during the visit. And it looks like this might be driven in part by an interaction where genetic information improves behavior towards the white patient. You get more visual contact with genomic information, but does not improve things for the Black patient. So overall, we're actually seeing quite a bit of consistency across all of these metrics, demonstrating that these new emerging genomic technologies will likely be applied differently depending upon a patient's race. So overall, these clinical simulation approaches for research and for evaluation have proven to be a really important tool in our armament for understanding the potential health equity problems that could emerge with new genomic technologies. So it's really giving us a good opportunity to start to think about how to address these issues before they occur in real clinical settings. We're working in an area that moves really, really rapidly. There's always a lot more to do. But I'm really happy to say that so far, VR has really proven equal to meeting a lot of these challenges. And so I will end by thanking all of my lab members, current and past, and all of the collaborators in the work that we performed. And I'm also happy to be contacted if anyone has further questions. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Susan. What a great way to start day 2 of VMed. Really appreciate your time. And the research that you're doing is very impactful and important. Next up, we're going to hear from David Beach. David Beach is an architect and an associate professor of architecture at the Hammond School of Architecture at Drury University. And I love the fact that he's an architect because it points out what a multidisciplinary field we find ourselves in here with virtual reality and medical extended reality. We have speakers from all sorts of backgrounds. We have computer programmers, we have design experts, we have patients, we have clinicians, in this case, an architect. And so David is going to be presenting his work, which he's entitled V-Architecture, which I think is great, building a blueprint for therapeutic virtual worlds. So with that, thank you so much, David, for being with us here in the XR Theater at VMed. And I look forward to hearing your presentation.
So, what if, just by exploring new spaces and engaging with our surroundings, we could improve health? I think that we can, and there is evidence to suggest that as you engage with spaces, your imagination is heightened, your senses are piqued, synapses are fired, all of which, if done well, can have a positive impact on healing. But exploring a space is difficult to do when confined to a room such as this. An architect designed this room, and as such, architects such as myself play a massive role in healthcare. But when we consider the confines of this space versus the immediate evocative sense of play and exploration in the opening image, we can begin to consider the negative ramifications of our work. And I understand that there are reasons why this room is designed the way it is: costs, maintenance, adaptability. I have designed hospital rooms very similar to this. So the immediate question is, as an architect, can we do more? And this has established my topic for today: building a blueprint for therapeutic virtual worlds. So I am Dave, I'm an architect and professor at Drury University, Hammond School of Architecture, and this talk is going to cover the relevance of an architectural presence in the creation of virtual reality. In this case, the design of therapeutic spaces for kids. So if you've seen any of my talks or sat in any of my classrooms, you will know that I don't talk about design without also talking about money. And zero glossy graphics on this one because I want this to sink in. From Fortune magazine, Meta, as a single company, is in the process of investing $10 billion on the metaverse, the immersive version of the internet. To put these numbers into context, in 2021, there was a total of $584 million spent in healthcare construction in the United States. So Meta, by itself, is spending nearly double what was spent last year on healthcare in the construction of virtual reality. One of our key speculations when DevKit 1 in 2013 from Oculus Rift arrived on our campus was that there would be a financial future in designing architecture that would never exist physically, but rather only inside a virtual reality. And in 2022, this slide points to that reality. There is literally more money available for the metaverse from a single company than all of healthcare and architecture, which is one of the most lucrative areas of design and construction. One of the students back in 2013 that was listening to me ramble on about the potential future of VR was Alla Al-Radwan, second from the right. And all of these are amazing humans, but Alla is absolutely an exceptional soul. After she graduated from Drury, she moved into a research position in the MIT Media Lab, where she posted a note back to me. Would you be interested in creating a think tank for medical VR? Which I responded, yes, please. And that conversation with Alla evolved into a research project with a small team of architecture students and the Chill Zone Pediatric Center at Montefiore. Our goal was to create a design vocabulary around a series of VR tests relevant to an architect's sensibilities and medical VR. This vocabulary became our design goals for spatial emotive displacement within medical VR experiences. Ambient spatial intensity. This is the antithesis of shooting zombies. The goal with ambient intensity is to create and engage curiosity rather than adrenaline-fueled intensity, crafting a place that is familiar, reducing distress, but distant enough to engage a sense of exploration and wonder. Iterative exploration. Kids should not spend more than about 10 to 15 minutes in VR, as emotive displacement can be too powerful and trigger negative side effects. As such, we need to design experiences that are both repetitive and iterative, with basic modifications for each experience. Experiential post-processing. Provided a shorter time span for kids within VR, it is imperative that each game continue into real space, connecting key aspects of the experience back into the analog world. This increases the overall escapism provided by each experience and builds social opportunities for shared experiences outside of VR. Education through immersion. As a relatively new media, VR is not about replacing existing forms of communication. It is a new modality to express, explore, and inform. As a result, an intentional focus should be made to leverage education within each immersive experience. So with these key descriptive components in place, we began to craft some small experiences with college students. Several of our earliest tests were in collaboration with an absolutely amazing artist from New York, Tom Christopher. In this case, taking one of his paintings and deconstructing it into an unfolding virtual world. And our results were college students completely lost in a different world. We began to learn to read reactions without being able to see eyes, which is something really tricky to do. I mean, sure, everyone moves their arms about in VR, but we began to discern micro-reactions, shoulders, the subtle drop of the jaw, the slight opening of the mouth, to indicate engagement into the space, to know when we were on to something genuine. The next challenge would be creating content to meet our objectives that we could publish to a wider audience. Basically, finding a way to mobilize work through the application of college courses. There was really nothing sneaky about putting medical VR into an architectural design curriculum. In fact, this was clearly communicated, and students found the notion of the class inspiring, and enrollment for the course capped in a few minutes. But there certainly were some sneaky educational moments that came from the course itself. In particular, this symbiotic educational loop, with students teaching kids about architecture through the process of learning about architecture, to teach kids about architecture through immersive experiences, to make more kids interested in architecture, which builds more architecture students. And you can't really create or force or invent this kind of symbiosis. You just have to love it when it happens. So our first architectural documersion film wrapped last year. It contains over 2.5 hours of VR architectural tours, each one around 10 minutes long, taking kids everywhere from ancient Rome to a chapel in Arkansas to the mountains of Switzerland, a trail in Norway, museums in Fort Worth and New York. We cruise literally around the world through time. And one of the most exciting discoveries in this process was voices. You see, we started out thinking that we would bring in voice talent to read scripts with power and inflection, but as these experiences were being crafted, each student was reading their script with so much honesty that collectively we decided that kids talking to kids was every bit as important to the authenticity of the experience as the visuals that they were building. It really begins to feel intimate. Let me hold your hand and I'm going to walk you to this absolutely amazing location. Our post-process experience then became the idea of fabricating custom parts using 3D printing relating to the spaces that were being shown in VR, helping students learn fabrication techniques and allowing kids to take authorship of the spaces that they've experienced. Our target is a 3D print that takes about 1 hour and a cost of about 25 cents to $1 for each set of parts printed. So these are super accessible. So that was 2020, and critical thinking forces us to consider what comes next. And my favorite critic is Beta Tester 1, my 12-year-old daughter, Olivia. She has seen every experience that I've created at every stage along the process. So she has been critiquing my work for the last 6 years, and 2 of her comments always resonated with me. First, I want to make some decisions. I want to go over there. And you see, our experiences to date have been immersive but crafted as linear architectural experiences, powerful but passive in terms of immersion. And second, why does it always have to be architecture? And well, architecture is what I do, but I suppose if I have these core values, these 4 goals we are trying to achieve, ambient intensity, iterative exploration, post-processing, and education, could these apply to something less architecture-y? So I decided to literally turn over the reins to my daughter for the next game, Kids Designing for Kids. So let me introduce you to Olivia and her immersive experience.
I wanted to build a game where you have the chance to learn about something different, using my favorite creatures of all time, dragons. When my dad would show me his work and explain to me about what this whole medical virtual reality stuff was and what it can do for kids stuck in a hospital room, I thought it was okay, but I wanted to see an entirely new world with something that didn't exist anywhere else. This is Reggie, my horse, and one of the most important things that I've learned through my riding experience, that it isn't just about jumping on the back of a horse. If that's all you do, they're gonna be a turd. You need to spend time with the horse, grooming them, feeding, cleaning, observing them in their pasture. I wanted to build the same experience with different dragons from my imagination, understanding each dragon's personality, understanding, and needs. When you do those things, you're brave enough to ride. And from those ideas, my dad and I started creating Rising Bravery, a game where you explore environments, learn about a dragon's personality, and apply what you've learned to show understanding, trust, and love, and then get the reward of bonding with and riding on the back of a dragon through their world.
So just like everything else, we want to extend the game, and Rising Bravery closes with a drawing lesson from Olivia, step by step showing how she creates and animates the dragons featured in the game. Speaking of which, we think we accidentally stumbled into something brand new, combining traditional cell animation with fully immersive VR. Done not really out of technical skills, but out of a complete disregard for the conventional VR development process. And that leads us back to architecture. Specifically, how could we apply what we are learning by gamifying our concepts and build a better architectural doc immersion experience? So I have totally reprogrammed the architectural VR curriculum for this summer's course to expand the work into non-linear game experiences. For instance, Thorncrown Chapel is an amazing building composed by a set of trusses in a forest. But what if those trusses had a different height, super tall, or kind of squished down, with completely different massing, or perhaps in an altogether different location? By deciding these factors through a branching series of interactions, we can begin to create a virtual Lego kit and open the conversation with kids about why design matters. So our next round of architectural doc immersions will launch at the end of summer of 2022, and will once again take our viewers all over the planet, but this time with the opportunity to shape their space. And we keep building things because we can't stop. So our first major creative collaboration with an outside entity is being announced here for the first time. Welcome to Coaster Studios VR. We are working on a project that takes me back to my days of architectural practice, where I often worked in the entertainment sector, amusement parks and roller coasters. Coming off of their feature-length film, This Is How We Roll, Taylor Bybee and Sarah Anderson of Coaster Studios are going to guide kids through the creation of a roller coaster, providing their insights, expertise, and filmmaking skills as applied to the VR space. This is not a game about riding a roller coaster, but a narrative experiential story about how they are designed, with a post-processing experience, including a ride on a non-VR screen of the creation and a physics lesson from the experts about how the ride works. Also in progress, because we just really like making things, it's what we do. Our program at the Hammonds School of Architecture has traditionally done at least 2 foreign studies per year. And starting this spring, we are sending our students out with 360 VR cameras, not just to capture locations, but to build VR experiences from real locations using 360 video to deliver narrative-based immersive explorations from all over the world. Our first project is happening this spring in Venice, an immersive scavenger hunt for the heart of Venice, journeying through canals, the basilica, maybe a bridge or two, all hosted by architecture student Sydney Stark. In the future, we are extremely excited about combining AR and VR to expand the architecture of a room. We expect to connect multiple rooms from different global locations through VR, making hospital rooms come alive with combinations of AR and VR experiences. I see this not as a technological task, but as an architectural task befitting the profession that designed the initial hospital room. Our architectural skill sets are uniquely positioned to work within VR. The design of space, motion, narrative, empathy, composition, tonality, and materiality are all transferable elements to VR and to the imagination of kids that need this escape. In closing, I am going to implore you to get in contact with me and our program because of what we need: more connections, more medical teams to collaborate with, and more humans to expand our network. We have a team of architects and developers crafting experiences as part of their education. We have methods of distributing VR work and playing it back on nearly every VR device with the exact same visual fidelity. We need more collaborators to help us test, refine, and realize the potential of this work and expand it to spaces beyond the confinement of walls to promote healing and recovery.
Well, thank you, David, so much for sharing your unique perspectives with us today at Virtual Medicine on the multidisciplinary opportunities in medical extended reality. We appreciate your time here in the XR Theater. And next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alfred Illaretta, who is an assistant professor of otolaryngology, or ENT, at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York, not to be confused with Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. Often they are confused. So he's out in New York, the other Mount Sinai. And so Dr. Loretta has been focusing on how to use VR in his surgical practice and understanding some of the implementation challenges and opportunities of using these technologies in clinical care. So appropriately, his talk is titled, How I Use VR in a High Volume Surgical Practice. Thanks so much for being with us today in the XR Theater.
Hello, I'm Alfred Mark Loretta, and I'm going to discuss my experience with virtual reality in my surgical practice. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Virtual Medicine Organization for inviting me to speak today. As you see, I'm a very firm believer in taking this sort of disruptive technology and implementing it into healthcare, as I've had an incredible experience so far in my career, which I'd like to share with you. So I am a skull-based surgeon by training. I did a residency in head and neck surgery at Mount Sinai in New York City, and then went on to complete a fellowship in skull-based surgery at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. Skull-based surgery is somewhat of a hybrid surgical pathway, combining the elements of head and neck surgery, oncologic surgery, neurosurgery, orbital surgery, as well as reconstructive surgery. I've been full-time academic faculty at the Mount Sinai Hospital since 2014, and I'm the director of the skull-based surgery division for the Mount Sinai Health System. In addition, I've been very academically oriented. I have been awarded several grants, as well as published approximately 80 peer-reviewed publications, as well as work within a biodesign and innovation group as well, based at our hospital system. Before I go on, these are my disclosures. I do have several patents, as well as external funding from a startup accelerator, which I participate in. All technology that I will be discussing has been FDA approved or approved by an institutional review board, and I have no other financial disclosures. As a skull-based surgeon, I spend most of my day taking care of patients and operating in a very complex area that involves the brain, the eyes, and the nose. The majority of the pathology is malignant, and it is malignant in benign tumors. The challenge here is to preserve function while maximizing our ability to remove the tumor. So, skull-based surgery has been pioneered ever since the 1950s and the 1960s. These tumors often involve a very extensive resection in which to even get to the tumor, we have to dissect and remove a portion of the face by making an incision over the top of the head and then dissecting and peeling off the soft tissue of the face, as well as the soft contents of the orbit to expose the cranial vault. Once the cranial vault's exposed, we drill into the bone of the head and remove the top of the cranium, giving us access to the brain, as well as the intranasal contents, the orbital contents, and even into the throat and nasopharynx contents. As you can imagine, this type of procedure can be very morbid. Patients do have significant issues postoperatively, as well as complications, and the inpatient hospital stays can last up to weeks to months. In addition, these patients also require significant reconstructive surgery afterwards for a good aesthetic result. Enter kind of the modern era of skull-based surgery. It's evolved significantly with the implementation of new technology and visualization, such as endoscopes, exoscopes, robotics, and intraoperative neuronavigation. I joke about this sometimes, but we pack so much technology into our operating room. We have so many screens that it sometimes resembles a sports bar. Literally, we're surrounded 360 degrees by different screens and computers and other technology. My specialty specifically is a natural area for us to kind of pilot the use of augmented reality in surgery, as I have all the tools and instruments and data needed to utilize a SLAM algorithm to create a AR environment. The map is created by the CT and MRI imaging, which is standard in all my cases. And in addition, I view the world through microscopes, endoscopes, exoscopes, and different other modalities to help augment my visualization during surgery. So these are kind of the silos in which we've used AR and mixed reality, all the way from preoperative surgical planning to interacting with the patients to controlling pain. So I'll go into a few of these here, as well as go through the literature we have created for this. So the first is preoperative surgical planning. This is before we go into the OR with a patient. Typically, we perform this the day or the morning of surgery. What we do is we merge the DICOM data from the CT and MRI scan as well as angiography to create a hybrid image that is then virtualized and reconstructed in a 3D environment. We use a head-mounted display like an Oculus as well as the controllers. And what we do here is we mentally model and virtualize our surgical approach, trying to figure out what the best way to get to a tumor is. What approach? Do I go through the nose? Do I go through the eye? Do I do an open approach to get the best exposure for the tumor, as well as limiting the structures that I may need to go through or potentially put in danger as we do an approach? Again, like I stated before, the optic nerve, the carotid artery, and various other neurovascular structures are oftentimes either in the way or very close to the tumors that we resect. In addition, it gives me the ability to anticipate any anatomical changes that may come. Here's another live video of the headset. This is the little avatar that you're seeing, kind of showing you the sort of visualization that we get. This is a craniopharyngioma tumor. In this aspect, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the tumor from an oblique angle and a different visualization that I would get operatively. This allows me to predict and anticipate a challenge here. For example, the basilar artery coming at the posterior aspect behind this tumor that almost comes blind when we're doing this surgical operation, removing the tumor, so I can anticipate that basilar artery will be there during the dissection. In addition, this also not only has this technology allowed me to minimize the morbidity of approach, but also has allowed us to use non-traditional approaches to remove tumors, such as placing small ports through the eye socket and small incisions in the forehead. In this patient, we had virtualized and planned this, and I was able to remove this large tumor in the brain. Instead of doing an open approach, I made small ports above the eye and above the nose, on which we made keyhole ports through the bone there with multiple instruments to allow us to remove this tumor without significant dissection. And this patient was able to go home in a few days versus several weeks to even a month after a large resection. Here's one of our virtualized images. This is a patient in which we're doing odontoidectomy, a very complex case where we remove the arch of C2 and the odontoid, which is the top of the spinal column in the area that interdigitates with the skull. It is the craniovertebral junction, and these cases can be very difficult because there's a significant amount of tissue. It's essentially the hardest place to reach in the back of the head, and there are significant neurovascular tissues that are there, such as both vertebral arteries as well as the basilar artery. And this technology allows us to plan and anticipate what kind of instruments we need to use to get back there, as well as any other challenges that may come during the case. Intraoperative use of mixed reality. So we also use this in the operating room when we're resecting actively in a dynamic fashion. What we're able to do is we have a fiducial that's tracking our endoscope, and we register this fiducial to our system. So that allows us to virtualize an image that corroborates or is congruent to our actual endoscopic image. If you look at the right, that's our virtualized image. On the left, that's what you actually see in the endoscope. And this is actually live. And sometimes we overlap the two images. But what this allows me to do is almost, in a pilot fashion, night fly, essentially. I'm able to operate through blood, work through bloody areas, in addition see through bone. That allows me to operate faster and more efficiently, as well as, understand and see what structures may be around during a small dissection. When we do these endoscopic cases, we don't have the ability to see all the anatomy, which I use to kind of navigate and kind of locate myself in an operative field, especially difficult in a really vascular tumor in which we operate in. So this is our experience using this mixed reality system. We've done the largest case series so far in the country or the world, I believe. In this publication in 2019, there was about 200 patients. To date, we've done over 500 patients using this system. We've had very good success. It was a little bit of a learning process trying to get this going. It took a lot of time to plan these structures, a lot of space. It is expensive, and we don't have a way to really bill or pay for this type of surgical planning and use within our operating room. We have difficulties with endoscopic calibration, as well as creating a true augmented reality system. The scopes are all different and have their own optical aberrations which need to be accounted for and which we do somewhat manually. In addition, the fiducials that we use to track the endoscope are bulky and not really well ergonomically designed, leading to some issues operatively such as hand cramping and kind of the bulkiness and adds weight to the instruments. For resident education, we've used this significantly. I have almost all my residents and my fellows plan in their cases in VR and kind of go through them so they can learn the anatomy. We extrapolate this in a study that we did with the medical students at Mount Sinai. These were naive MS1 medical students, and we had one group use traditional learning materials and the other group use a VR system, head-mounted display, to learn the cerebrovascular system. They had pre and post testing. In addition, we tested them with a NASA TLX cognitive load as well as motivational scores. Here are our results, and then you see across the board the pre and post testing was higher in the VR group, and most significantly we saw increased motivational scores within the cohort that did the VR, as well as decreased cognitive load scores in the VR group, which intuitively I thought that we would find. We've used this study with other surgical specialties and other anatomical areas and have had very similar results and good success. We've also used VR modalities in non-opioid procedural pain management. I do a significant amount of procedures in the office setting. As you know, the head and neck is a richly innervated area, one of the most sensitive areas of our body. It is very difficult to get complete pharmacologic anesthesia in these patients. We can numb them up with topical sprays and we can place local injections, but we cannot get them completely numb due to the fact that there is an active airway there and they need to be able to breathe and protect their airway. So what we've used is a VR system in a distraction setting to allow us to do these procedures. This was a randomized controlled trial which we used a scene which they would look through their eyes versus an active VR, true VR interactive scene. This is a patient in my actual clinic. And as you've seen from our results here, we saw significant improvements and excellent findings in patient pain, the reported pain that they have, as well as the patient satisfaction scores, which were significantly better than the control group. And we even crossed over these patients and found similar findings. We took this study and implemented it in our pediatrics group and our other surgical groups and had very similar results across the board. Overall, this helped patients be able to try to tolerate these fairly invasive procedures in the office, especially in the pediatrics group. And it's something that we regularly do in our office for any of these procedures now. Finally, I'm going to close of kind of the next evolution that we are looking to see is using the HoloLens 2 in an AR fashion for surgical planning and intraoperative neuronavigation. There's a company that I work with called Mediviz, using the HoloLens 2, and what we're doing is able to create these holographic images to look at imaging in the OR and then overlap them on the actual patient. This is actual patient in the operating room here, and this is the view through my head-mounted display. Here we're registering the patient, registering the neuronavigation, creating a one-to-one representation. And what we're able to do is overlay this representation onto the actual patient. What this allows us to do is to visualize the imaging, allows me to plan my bone cuts, see my bone cuts, plan the reconstruction, and even see, potential areas where the carotid artery is. This allows us for just another deeper ability to visualize our reconstructions, our resections, and perform more efficient, safer surgery. So this is the conclusion of my talk. If you have any questions, this is my email, and I'm looking forward to participating and watching the rest of the program. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. And next up in the XR Theater, we're going to hear from Dr. Austin Gibbs from the UK and from the Allen Lab, where he has been working on developing ways to translate technology into meaningful and deliverable clinical practice innovations. So Austin will be presenting a talk titled Hearts and Minds, Physical and Emotional Benefits of Using Virtual Reality in Cardiology. Dr. Gibbs, thanks for being with us today.
My name is Dr. Austin Gibbs, and I'm the director of the Allen Lab, an immersive technologies research lab in the beautiful island of Jersey. Now, for those unaware, we lie just off the coast of France, famous mainly as a tax haven, but we're unique in the world as the only place with 100% fibre to every single household. Hell, we've even got it to the castles in the sea. We have all 5 IoT networks, 5G rolling out, and all situated in a bounded population with single utilities and health providers. This makes us perfectly placed as a sandbox to develop and research digital technologies. We also have 34 beautiful beaches, so we're a literal sandbox too. Today, I will talk about one of the toys we play with in the sandbox, virtual reality. It also happens to be my personal favourite. Now, my first real virtual reality experience was quite a few years back. A friend of mine, whose single life leads him to be a brilliant source of nerd toys, got an early headset. I shot down to his house, and it was fantastic, shooting arrows at marauding hordes. Just awesome. But, being a data whore, if you cut me, I'll bleed binary, I was wearing a fitness tracker. A few days later, I was downloading it and noticed that the heart tracing looked identical to other feeds from CliffPath runs. It had that granularity, that randomness you get when bouncing around the cliffs dodging seagulls. Interesting. Now, I'll be honest, my first thought was, could I use this to convince my wife that gaming was as good for me as running? I still run. My second thought was, but I am a gamer. I'm programmed to get excited by gaming tech. Perhaps it's just me. So I started to put people in VR wired for sound from all walks of life. Fit, dad fit, gamers, Luddites, old, young. And every single one had a response. And the exact phrase was repeated again and again, sometimes in slightly more colourful language. I know it's not real, but it feels real. But why should that have a role to play in health, and more specifically, cardiology? Well, to understand that, we need to understand what it is to know and what it is to feel. Now, we take in data from the outside world into this beautiful evolutionary blancmange, this plastic neural matrix. That data is messy, often not even time indexed. Indeed, if I clap my hands, the sensation of touch, the sound, and the visual movement all enter the matrix at different times, yet to me it's aligned. It's a data scientist's nightmare. Missing data is created, other data is bent and deformed according to experience and expectation to construct our reality. Looking at this graduated rectangle, yet it is not. Even conscious knowledge does not prevent the process. The next image is still, I promise you, yet it looks like it's moving, and you can't stop it. But there's another part to this, an older part, a less sophisticated part. These inputs trigger output to the physiological systems. From the earliest chemotaxis towards the more obvious fight and flight, these autonomic responses can survive the evolutionary pressures of a few false positives, but not false negatives. They take less data to trigger. They can be more easily fooled. And that's what VR does. It triggers these systems, regardless of knowing it's not real. And now it gets really interesting, because you can see we can measure these responses. We have a myriad of parameters we can measure. I mean, we can even measure sphincter tone. I'm not sure if this is the ultimate wearable, but I do wish they'd make a wireless version. This gives us an output. VR gives us a controllable input, a keyboard and mouse to program the response. But what does this really mean? Well, in our department, we've taken this in two broad directions, the heart and the mind. So in pacemaker insertion, our patients are immersed in healthy mind, with directed controlled breathing and mindfulness environments. This helps to keep the heart rate low and the patient relaxed. Using B-Secure's heart key, we can monitor their physiological stress levels and reduce or even in some cases remove the need for sedation. When undergoing the procedure, it is far nicer to be sitting in a Japanese temple than under fluorescent light staring at a blue surgical drape. In acute interventions like pericardiocentesis, transesophageal echocardiograms, lumbar punctures, or even good old-fashioned thumb boo-boos, our patients have the option of sitting on their favourite beach in Jersey, listening to the waves, rather than staring at the needle that's coming towards them. It also helps to keep the heart rate lower and reduces the need for drugs. Or in the case of boo-boos, "Daddy, it's a T-Rex" is a far better response than "Ouch, you're hurting me." In echocardiograms, VR's ability to induce an adrenaline response, regardless of knowing it's not real, is allowing us to explore utilising it to perform stress echocardiogram without the need for drugs, and giving more realistic adrenaline spikes than a reclined exercise bike. Combining deep neural network image interpretation with ultronics to pick up those tiny changes as the heart rate peaks and troughs. Anyone who loves roller coasters or horror movies can relate. That sudden fear response allows us to view the heart under its most extreme stress, therefore be sure that we are catching any sign of a problem. And indeed, a supposed healthy volunteer walked the plank in VR. And as you can see, this caused their heart rate to rise to such a degree that we revealed a problem that previously had not been known about. In the second area of the mind, we help in understanding the condition that we've diagnosed. VR allows us to walk our patients through their scans and anatomy to help visualize what is going on inside and why the treatments work. Being able to imagine what is happening inside your body can help connect the sensation of atrial fibrillation, for example, to the internal pathology and help reduce the anxious, panicky feelings that at times overwhelm us all. We are using VR's ability to delight and engage in teaching about resilience and communication, landing them on the moon, defusing a bomb, or being scolded by an overworked nurse in a cubicle. This ability to generate physiological responses in a fun way helps us reinforce and practice skills under more realistic environmental factors. We also know that anxiety is an independent risk factor for heart disease. Indeed, many patients will be anxious to receive the diagnosis that there's something wrong with their heart. VR can be an excellent place to start practicing mindfulness and managing that anxiety. Few people have the time or space to practice deep meditation, but half an hour paddling a canoe around the sun-dappled lakes of Canada or strolling through a forest with a mindfulness teacher is a great start. Again, working with B-Secure, we're examining its ability to induce a parasympathetic state over and above simple 2 dimensions. The final area of VR can help us in trying to change destructive behaviours. Humans, by their very nature, are creatures of vice. There are very few mountain gorillas with a drinking problem. We know that patients who've had heart attacks are far more likely to quit smoking and lose weight. That sudden, stark, emotional moment of the harmful effects of smoking helped the motivation to break the addictive cycle. But it would be better to shut the gate before that horse has bolted. We need to give that emotional trigger, not just the words. You see, as humans, our experience of reality is a construct. It's not just us externally wired in. We listen in on those physiological responses. We have a complete integration with our wet world of wonder, and it makes up a secondary sensory input into that plastic neural matrix. And just like those external senses, it's subject to missing data being created, other data being bent and deformed according to experience and expectation. This is how we feel. I feel hot. I feel cold. I feel scared. I feel relaxed. This part of the construction adds colour and flavour. But it too can be subject to VR trickery. Put burn patients into snow scenes. They feel cold and need less analgesia. And the deeper we go with immersion using techniques like embodiment, placing the entire body within VR, we can begin to work on the perceptions of those sensations. We hope to utilise this emotional trickery to help embed behavioural change. Altering harmful behaviour requires it is stored beyond the short term, beyond just the classroom or the warning label. The most potent memory storage is emotional ones, those with feeling. To break that cognitive dissonance, the innate humanity of struggling to make a connection from the cigarette I'm having now to the heart attack it could lead to later. With the brilliant work of Mel Slater and others, VR is beginning to demonstrate this ability, profoundly affecting empathy and body image, and having lasting effects on how we perceive ourselves. From diagnosing arrhythmias to improving therapeutic intervention, from patient and student education to potentiating lifestyle prevention, VR has the potential to transform across the health spectrum. It affords the opportunity of individualized content targeted to a particular psychophysiological outcome, a tool towards the bigger goal of delivering truly personalized, democratized medicine. I know it's not real, but it feels real. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Austin, for sharing your work with us today in the XR Theater. Now, next up, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Walter Werzowa, who is a musician and a composer, music producer, a sound inventor, and he founded HealthTunes, which is a California nonprofit online streaming audio service that was created to improve health, focused on soundscapes and audio. You've certainly, if you haven't heard of Walter before, you've heard of his work because he's very well known for having composed and produced the Intel meme, or the bong. I won't try to reproduce it here, but you've heard it before, which apparently is played somewhere in the world every 5 minutes around the clock. So that is a lasting legacy. You've all heard the Intel meme before. So we're very happy to have Walter here, not necessarily talking about creating memes, but he will be talking about what he calls good vibrations, the importance of virtual soundscapes for healing and immersion. And this is important because we often focus on the visual component of XR, but XR is about immersing people in all spheres, with all senses, including smell, including touch in many cases, and in this case, certainly including sound. So with that background, I really look forward to hearing Walter's presentation. Walter, thanks so much for being with us today here at Virtual Medicine 22. Take it away.
Isolation became one of the core challenges of time. Human cannot function in a social vacuum, which the last years offered us. Music counters loneliness and creates liveliness. Music starts a dialogue, our inner dialogue. We are not alone. Thank you for having me here, and a big hello from Vienna, Austria to Los Angeles, Cedars-Sinai. My name is Walter Werzowa. I'm not a doctor. I'm a composer who post-graduated in Los Angeles from USC and built 3 globally successful music companies in the States. I'm founder of HealthTunes. Before I share music medicine with you, let me share a couple of signposts in my career. You might have heard this melody. I started audio branding with this mnemonic. It became the most performed melody in broadcast in the 90s. The current ubiquitous mnemonic is my recently updated AT&T mnemonic. I work with Steven Spielberg, Wim Wenders, and my latest project I'm really passionate about is finishing Beethoven's 10th Symphony. Yes, that's right. And this work placed at #2 in the album charts. I collaborated with Beethoven Spirit, his sketches and letters, that is. And my team was Rutgers University's AI whiz Ahmed El-Gamal, Harvard University, and Cornell. I learned about AI and how it can invigorate music medicine. The Beethoven project was noticed by Robbie Williams, and we started collaborating for his upcoming release, a new version of his Angels hit song. So how did I get to be here, to be on stage here at Cedars? When my son was 5 years old, he was diagnosed with Legg-Perthes. This is a rare disease. His hip joint literally disintegrated. The healing process is long and arduous and a painful process. We tapped into osteopathy, acupuncture, and sound healing with specific curated music. That accelerated his healing process, and a year later, he was running again. I'm so grateful about this, and I want to give back and make evidence-based music medicine available. So I built a streaming platform for a ubiquitous, scalable, evidence-based music medicine service to access for everybody, anytime, anywhere. Let me ask you, what is music? And the best definition I found was organized sound. And I would like to add one word to this: intentional organized sound. What are the effects of music on us? Musical involvement activates more areas of the brain than any other activity. This is what Professor Daniel Levitin found in multiple research studies. And this is how your brain looks when listening to music. And your body equally responds to sound and music. Music enhances hormone production. It accelerates dopamine and prolactin production, a hormone that makes us cope better with traumatic experiences. Melancholic music especially addresses this. So that makes sense when we feel down or depressed, that we more likely listen to low tempo and melancholic music. It directly helps us to cope. The building stones of music are melody, which translates into emotion, harmony, auditory beat stimulation, entrainment. Rhythm is triggering physical entrainment. Sound triggers hormone production. So what does music? It not only entertains us and explains and gives context, like in film music or concerts. It accelerates hormone production, not only dopamine, but especially prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone that helps us to find new perspectives in trauma. That explains when we are down, maybe depressed, low energy, that we listen to melancholic music, which logically doesn't make too much sense. But melancholic music is proven to accelerate prolactin production. Music helps with vagus stimulation, so addresses the parasympathetic nervous system. It does respiratory entrainment, brainwave entrainment. It interacts, it connects, it communicates. It brings us together. 2 weeks ago, I saw Brennan Spiegel's tweet. A study reveals that sleeping on your left side can reduce nighttime acid exposure and speed up acid clearance. It's a simple technique to consider for nighttime symptoms. So what are other simple techniques and modalities in the medical health field? In a system where there is so much isolation, where we are faced with cognitive, social, physical challenges, over-medication, limited me time, and a high demand in personalized treatments. This is where HealthTunes comes in. So what is HealthTunes? HealthTunes is a streaming digital pharmacy prescribing evidence-based music medicine. It's accessible via browser, iOS, Android, and mobile app. and in VR. And music is a non-invasive modality. How does auditory beat stimulation work? HealthTunes embeds ABS, auditory beat stimulation, which is binaural beats and isochronic beats, into playlists that influence and entrain brainwave patterns, helping decrease stress and anxiety, improve sleep, and reduce pain. A binaural beat is an auditory phenomenon when two different sound waves with a close frequency rate are perceived by an individual through each ear. This experience enables the listener to perceive a third tone. This third tone is a binaural beat. This way, we can produce very low frequency sound. The science behind ABS is well documented. Many conditions are supported. Binaural beats and isochronic beats are embedded in our music therapies. We focus on stress, anxiety, burnout, and with that, isolation, sleep, pain, memory, and attention. We added epilepsy to our therapy templates. In epilepsy, we have a reduction of episodes by 70%. 70%. And this is just with music. This especially is helpful in drug-resistant epilepsy. There are plenty of meta-analyses. We attach them to therapies and it can be found on our website. Those studies talk on reduction of anxiety to affect cognition, reducing anxiety levels, helping with memory concerns, positive effect on attention, and reducing the amount of intraoperative anesthesia, especially in pain. We record a high efficacy by reducing pain perception. Binaural beats are powerful in sleep challenges. Recent research suggests that binaural beats may improve sleep quality and mental state, increase sleep stability, and improve daytime alertness. Stress can be better managed with according music. And again, music liking is important. Binaural beats and music in behavioral health. Music listening and music making activities are powerful tools to engage multisensory and motor networks, induce changes within these networks, and foster links between distant but functionally related brain regions. This is how our user phase looks like. You can search symptoms, we call them also targets or diagnosis, and find music genres accordingly. The liking of music is important. That is why we have a wide variety of music genres available. Binaural beats are for some difficult to listen to. So we add them to music. And if it's music you like, it is almost like diluting cough syrup in water. You still get the ingredients needed, but they taste better. This is how our therapy engine looks like. Every binaural beat is metadated and shows exactly what the functions are, and again, all evidence-based. We also have a dosage therapy engine. Here you can see how long the session needs to be. If you want to listen to it on a daily basis, once a day, twice a day, and how long the therapy needs to be. It also gives recommendations when to listen to the music therapy. And on top of it, we have all relevant evidence-based research available with the therapy. Now, I want to talk about our incredible partner, Spatial, the first real-time 3D sound orchestration and delivery platform. Howard Rose is leading the health and wellness department of Spatial. Spatial is a high-quality immersive virtual sound on real speakers that transforms real spaces. It is a creative tool for real-time immersive soundscapes. And Spatial immersive audio meets the demands of medicine. Through precision, sound can be targeted like a drug. Standardization, clear protocols link to outcomes. Sound therapy is easy and prescribable. Personalization, real-time response to patient through sensors. we are presenting our solutions at South by Southwest 22, redefining healing experiences with sound. Howard Rose is guiding this panel, and Dr. Capps, the Chief Information and Digital Officer of Wellstar Health Systems, is part of this panel. We're collaborating with Wellstar Health in building immersive rooms for caregivers and patients. HealthTunes is leveraged in many verticals. We are present in a couple of hospitals, and we are in a couple of medical research studies. COSO-FI, you see it in the bottom right, is a European Union funded medical study. It addresses cognitive, social, and physical in high functioning elders. This study describes the effect of music in VR. How can we help? Immersive experiences for caregivers and patients, especially in VR. You just heard about Wellstar. Potential integration into clinical trials, potential integration into patient support programs to increase engagement and provide additional value. Here is HealthTunes in NICU. There is a phenomenon, heart rate entrainment, which can be used in the NICU. We match the BPM of elevated heart rate of the baby here at 195 with music and slow down music. And in a matter of 50 seconds here in this video, this baby is at resting heart rate. Are you ready to improve your life with the sound of well-being? Come and talk with us. We love to collaborate with you. Let's bring music medicine into the world. Music is transformational. Music can transcend experiences. Sound can be part of your health journey. It is readily available to all of us. Thank you from the HealthTunes team.
Well, thank you, Walter, so much for sharing with us the power of sound in contributing to immersion. And we have to think about all the different ways that we can nudge the senses, and acoustic soundscapes is one way to do that. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Now, next up is Dr. Todd Chang, who is the Divisional Director for Research and Scholarship for the Division of Emergency Medicine at Children's Hospital Los Angeles here in the Southern California area. And he is going to be discussing with us today how he uses VR as a training tool for pediatric emergency medicine resuscitation, evidence and best practices from an academic simulation center. So Dr. Chang, thanks so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Hello there. Thank you guys for attending the virtual VR Medicine Conference. My name is Todd Chang. I am a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, not too far from Cedars-Sinai, and I'm faculty and associate professor of medical education and pediatrics at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. And I get to detail to you a little bit about what we've done in virtual reality as a training tool in our specialty, and just giving you some of the best practices and evidence from one of our simulation centers. Currently, I am an unpaid conflict of interest. You'll hear about the studies that were sponsored previously from Oculus from Facebook, currently Oculus from Meta, and I work as an unpaid medical advisor to one of the companies that was part of this in 2016, now called i3 Simulations. So the objectives of this talk are really simple. We're going to discuss something called stress inoculation, and that's our primary target for training and resuscitation. And we're going to explain to you with our data some of our physiological stress and how it works within VR simulations specifically designed for stress inoculation. The VR that we designed is provider focused, and there's 4 different types, as you know, in healthcare Two of them are patient-focused, whether it's therapeutic escape or therapeutic desensitization, and you've heard talks about this already in the conference. There may be something that's on the provider side that's three-dimensional visualization, that's anatomical, helping surgeries, but this fourth section is simulation training or assessment, typically done with mannequins, perhaps actors, but VR has certainly had its foothold in here. As a reminder, the reason we do healthcare simulation with the VR is that we're the only industry, the high-risk industry, in which continuous, proper rehearsal and practice is really not normal or expected at all, which is a shame, and even Broadway has figured this out. We've detailed what screen-based simulation and virtual reality can do within our tiny little specialty in pediatric emergency medicine, which is where I work in, and we have some evidence to show that simulation is going to be a wonderful training tool as well as an assessment tool for rising physicians, clinicians, as well as to maintain skills. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this paper has shown us in that VR does enable full control of audiovisual cognitive load, and with the level of programming and very careful curation of the VR training, you can actually influence, perhaps mitigate some of the negative effects of physiological stress. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the project we started in 2016 with us at Children's Hospital Los Angeles under the VR for Good campaign that started back in the day. I'm going to credit to BioFlight VR and AISolve as the two companies. Again, i3 Simulations is the new burgeoning of AISolve. The quick background is that physiological stress is perhaps negative, but perhaps positive. We're still understanding it in terms of cumulative stress, burnout amongst many of our clinical colleagues that have been a problem throughout the COVID pandemic, as well as even beyond that. We do know that resuscitations and code blue arrests and cardiac arrests, particularly for children, are very stressful for providers. It's not a common occurrence, but when it happens, it's a big deal. And when a resuscitation happens during a physician shift, what we've found is that there are not permanent, but at least entire shift-long changes that we can measure with heart rates and salivary cortisol levels. This particular graph shows the difference between an 8-hour evening shift when there is no event, in other words, no resuscitation at all, checked during the middle of the shift at the 4-hour mark, and at the end of the shift at the 8-hour mark on the right-hand side, and what happens to your heart rate in the light gray, which actually goes up with any resuscitation by the mid-shift or any resuscitation by the end of shift. And again, these are heart rate changes compared to the beginning of this shift. So no matter what point in the 8-hour shift that a pediatric emergency medicine physician had a resuscitation, your heart rate actually changes for the rest of the shift. We also did some salivary cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone that's released during actual stress. Typically, throughout an evening shift, let's say 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. or 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., everyone's cortisol levels goes down. That's just how diurnal levels work in cortisol levels. So in the black, these are shifts in which there are no events by 4 hours on the left-hand side and no events by 8 hours on the right-hand side in the black bar. These show a healthy decline in cortisol levels as predicted. The problem is when you do have an event, when you have a resuscitation before the mid-shift, your cortisol levels do not actually change at all by the 4-hour mark. And if you have one before end of shift, it declines, but it does not decline nearly enough as it's supposed to with no events. And so having a single resuscitation at any point during a work shift for a clinician actually blunts the decrease in cortisol levels that's supposed to be healthy. The implications of this is currently unknown. It's unknown if this leads to a cumulative effect as more and more people experience more and more resuscitations. But this is an unusual and alarming trend that we're seeing. And so we decided to think about stress cortisol levels with immersive virtual reality as an emerging, unproven simulation technology for low-frequency, high-stakes events such as resuscitation. So we wanted to generate validity evidence for what we call psychological fidelity. Can we induce similar or different physiological stress markers between VR and real situations? We also wanted to find out differences between experts and novices, people who've been doing it for a while versus some of the trainees that are rising. Here's, for those of you who are researchers, this is the official research aim 1 to compare provider stress physiologies during resuscitations and VR resuscitations. And then we also wanted to see performance differences and physiologies between residents and attendings within VR simulations. Again, for those of you not in medicine, residents are the juniors and the novices, attendings are the seniors, the experienced. The actual development was relatively straightforward. I think this is the part that you guys may know quite well. We used standard branch chain logic for 2 scenarios, status epilepticus and anaphylactic shock in children. We were able to rent a mocap studio in Los Angeles to film all of us doing all the actions so that you can actually recognize some of the hand movements that we do as clinical procedures. Our BioFlight VR colleagues and AISoft colleagues then collaborated together to create essentially a virtual rendering of our trauma bay, as you can see here. This is the final product as it looks like, and the next video will actually show you some of the audio visual that we placed in to maximize the level of stress that we could provide in VR.
Why aren't you doing anything?
Code Red, 3rd floor, nursing station. Code Red, 3rd floor, nursing station.
You're going to lose him if you don't do something now.
Entrance. Code Blue, lobby main entrance.
You need to give a medication. Oh, why aren't you doing anything?
Code Red, 3rd floor, nursing station. Code Red, 3rd floor, nursing
Why aren't you
station.
doing anything?
Code Blue,
You need
lobby
to give a
main
medication.
entrance. Code Blue, lobby main entrance.
The Ativan has been given, but the child is still seizing.
Nursing station.
In the interest of time, I've cut the video a little bit short, but suffice to say the baby does well at the end. We wanted to show you a little bit of a clip because for those of you who are in medicine, the actual algorithm for infant status epilepticus is pretty simple. It's about 4 to 5 steps, and it goes relatively slower than what you see there. The problem is doing it in a stressful situation, so we amped up the stress with the crying mother, the overhead pages, the impatient nurse, everything to make these situations seem more stressful than it needs to be, really. Okay, so here again is the aim 1. We decided to include fellows and attendings who are essentially the seniors in pediatric emergency medicine. That's what PEM stands for at our hospital with evening shifts, particularly because that's the busiest. We excluded those who were pregnant at the time because pregnancy changes your heart rates and cortisol levels differently than when you're not pregnant. We asked all providers, who look like everyone on the upper right, to don hexoskins. These have 3 lead EKGs inside that transmit through Bluetooth, so we can measure heart rate during the entire shift with their normal clothes on top. And then we use salivary cortisol testing that you see with the little pledget there every time that we needed to. During an 8-hour ED shift, which at the time we were all 8 hours, we collected samples at the hour 0, hour 4, and hour 8. Pre, mid, and post shifts. And anytime there was a resuscitation, we also collected more heart rates and an additional salivary cortisol level at that time. During the analysis, we used a simple binary variable, whether it's real versus not real, and the outcome variables that we chose were the delta heart rates compared to no resuscitation, and salivary cortisol levels, delta again, compared to no resuscitation. We used equivalence testing as our hypothesis was an equivalence test using overlapping 95th confidence intervals. If they overlapped, they were equivalent. If not, they were not. Aim 2 determined physiology differences between the residents and attendings between VR simulations. And for this one, we used the same cohort, but we also added residents who are reasonably novice, although we'll see in a second that our residents, PGY3 residents, are actually pretty good, and our exclusion criteria remain the same. In this particular protocol for the VR, we asked people to either do the seizure to anaphylaxis or anaphylaxis to seizure. We randomized who got which, and this was a 1 hour-long VR session on their day off. We collected samples at pre-VR, inter-VR, and post-VR at the 0, 30-minute, and the 60-minute mark. The independent variable in this case was also binary, but young versus old, or inexperienced versus experienced. And the outcome variables were time to critical actions, but you'll also see some physiological markers. And then we did Mann-Whitney U tests between the two groups. So during this time, we were able to track 69 actual real shifts, which included 31 events, which are classified into 25 of them being classified as red, which in our hospital means an ESI level 1 of critical patients that are resuscitations. We also included seizures and anaphylaxis patients that had active management, which included 6 of the 31 events. The heart rate changes were such. Along the x-axis, you'll see that low heart rates and high heart rates over here. In the emergency department, if you had a resuscitation, your average heart rate change went up by 13.9 beats per minute. And in VR, your average heart rate increase from before VR to during VR was about 6.5, and these were both significant. However, when we looked for equivalence testing and mapping the 95th confidence intervals, these did not overlap. In other words, the ED delta heart rates was substantially different than and not equivalent to the VR changes. Similarly, when we looked at salivary cortisol levels, when you had a resuscitation in a shift in the emergency department, your salivary cortisol levels did go up substantially by 0.1 micrograms per deciliter, which is significant. And during VR, the salivary cortisol levels did not change in the 30-minute span that we saw. These were not shown to be equivalent. We were a little disappointed that the VR did not cause as much stress as the real thing, but at the same time, we felt that it was reasonably unrealistic for a 1 hour VR session to provide the similar stress levels that you could with the 8 hours. So the interpretation is that they do occur, the physiologic changes in VR, but they're not necessarily equivalent to real life events. So we pivoted to saying that VR training is likely safer and therefore should be an entry point for novice learners for stress inoculation. And this is what we wrote in our final words on the development and considerations for VR simulations paper. Interestingly, when we looked at AIM-2 for physiologic differences, we know that the residents, the novices and attendings had slightly different heart rates, just about 6 points on the residents, and this could just be attributable by age and not necessarily stress. However, mean salivary cortisol levels are supposed to go up with age, and the residents actually showed a doubling of the salivary cortisol levels than the attending physicians, even though these two groups performed very similarly in the actual VR. In other words, the scoring system on VR was actually not that different between the two groups, but their stress perception was definitely different when the novices were compared. So yeah, performance differences were minimal, but stress response was very, very different, and experience appears to mitigate stress response. And finally, when we looked at stress response and looking at cognitive load instead, how much are they processing when we attach the EEGs? This is a study that we did with Columbia University as well as ITSEC. ITSEC was the conference with Aptima. We measured the same cognitive load with stress physiologies, and we see in the blue the novices were experiencing higher cognitive load than the pink experts, even though the performance was the same. When you asked them about the workload, this was also similarly higher, and the cognitive load dynamic load was substantially higher in the younger cohort as well. Suffice to say, this is the last slide, when we have conclusions on the stress inoculation in our burgeoning work, number one, we know that physiological stress occurs during resuscitations. This seems to be a given. And we know that the effects are mitigated by experience, and we could detect them in a safe setting like in virtual reality. And therefore, we believe that VR provides a safer, a curated, and perhaps a lesser stress response than real resuscitations that enable for training and mitigation of future stress. And that's our presentation. This is my email contact if you have any further questions and are looking forward to the next steps and working with you guys. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Todd, for presenting that interesting work with us today. Later on, there's going to be more about pediatrics as we head into the deep dives later this afternoon. If you're interested in pediatric programming, take a look at that deep dive coming up later in the afternoon to hear more about the ways virtual reality is being used with kids. Okay, we're going to take a break now. Thank you all to the speakers for a wonderful session this morning in the XR Theater. We're going to take a quick break to do whatever you need. Head on over to the exhibit hall if you've got some time. Check out some of the booths, see what they have to offer. Take a bio break, whatever you need to do. We're going to be back here in the XR Theater at 9 a.m. Pacific time. There will be parallel programming on the main stage that also begins at 9 a.m. Again, you can pick one or the other, but whichever one you're not able to see, you can always go check it out later on demand. But continue checking in on the chat. I think there's been a lot of really useful back and forth and engagement there to help augment what we're hearing. And I look forward to the next session in the XR Theater. We'll see you back here at 9 a.m. Take care.